Welcome to the State of the Nation Weekly Update. I'm your host, Mike Sham, and this episode is brought to us by Pace Car Rental. Get your Pace Car Rental if you need any rental services anywhere around South Africa, and use our code SONA to get a discount. This weekly update might come as a bit of a surprise. It is a really upbeat, optimistic view of what could be happening in South Africa right now. We stand on the precipice of an announcement of the Government of National Unity, and it seems like the adults have really got into the room. I mean, it didn't look likely. I've mentioned before in previous updates that it was looking less and less likely that we were going to have a Government of National Unity, especially one that would hold. But I didn't foresee what seems to me to be happening at the moment, and that is the trend of the ANC almost choosing a different horse to the one that I thought they were going to choose, and that is to forego the other comrades and to start becoming a party that's best for the bulk of South Africans. Now let's just start with a bit of a history lesson. The ANC came into the new South Africa as a movement, a broad church. Everybody was welcome, and the only thing that united this disparate group was the fight against apartheid. That is what gave birth to the modern ANC. It wasn't one based on policy, it wasn't one based on ideas, and nobody even thought about governance. So what you ended up having was, as they called it, a Tripartite Alliance, which was really quite a misnomer. They had bolted on various things onto this vehicle, and you had this ANC, which had started out as a movement for very prominent, wealthy black landowners to try and secure their property rights in 1912, ahead of the Union of South Africa's infamous Land Act, which precluded blacks from owning land in the bulk of South Africa. So the ANC was not built for some kind of liberation movement. It was built as a mechanism to protect wealthy black landowners and educated black South Africans. It morphed into this liberation movement as the nationalist government came along and the apartheid laws became crazier and more intense and generally became a liberation movement. The Communist Party, which was around at that point and totally a white organization, this was going back into a couple of years after the establishment of what became the African National Congress, was purely a white organization that had developed in South Africa in sympathy with the communist movement in the Soviet Union and other places, and gradually started to change, and soon enough that body joined up with the ANC. Now, we're going through this thing and slowly, and as we get there, it'll all make sense in a minute. The next bit was the trade union, COSATU, joining up with the ANC, and that happened very late, largely because under the nationalist government, they had banned trade unions, certainly for black workers. And it was only in the 1970s that we had labor unions at all, and that rapidly became the place that black people could join a movement. This was the heyday of banning parties and banning any kind of movement, but now suddenly trade unions were allowed, and this led to the first organized body of black people in the old South Africa. They too joined up with the ANC. So now we've got this body as we know it today. We call it the Tripartite Alliance. They call themselves a movement, which actually has got a whole lot of really, really strange bedfellows together. Because all the way from the communists on the left to the capitalists on the right, with the trade unionists in the middle, under one big broad church, they became the African National Congress, roughly as we know it today. And we have seen so many different people in that party that don't share the same values. They went into power in 1994, and it was the astute leadership of Nelson Mandela that managed to keep this this group that had no right to be together, kept them together. And everybody kind of got what they wanted. The union members got the government's ear, they could do whatever they like, and the government rapidly became the biggest employer of union members. The Communist Party, which had become a bit of a joke in the death of communism largely around the world, had become a place where people could put on a badge, call each other comrades and get cushy jobs, but they're hardly communists. And of course, the real foundation of the ANC, which was your black middle class, could benefit from business contracts in the new South Africa, especially when it came to tenders and BEE. On the one hand, you got these really arch capitalists working side by side with trade unionists and communists. This was a broad church that really couldn't hold, and now it is not holding any longer. It seems like the ANC may finally have given up any pretense of being a broad church. So why have they done this? Why does it seem like the ANC is on the threshold of doing what is right for the country and what will eventually end up helping you in your business? Well, the simple reality, I think, is that there's been a lot of pressure that has built up from various bodies that have broken off from the ANC. Now, it's very easy to lump the EFF of Julius Malema together with the MK party of Jacob Zuma. But in actual fact, these are two bodies that have very different ideals. On the one hand, you have got the MK party, which is a tribal, paternalistic party that really wants to go back to a pastoral type of environment, a very traditional way of running the country that would not have been out of place in the 1900s or even the 1800s. This is not a modern party. This term progressive, it's exactly the opposite of progressive. It's paternalistic. Pregnant girls will be sent to Robben Island. All the land will be owned by the king. You'll pay 2 cows when you're caught speeding. It is anti-progress party. On the other hand, you've got the EFF that resembles more of a party or a movement that you would have found in the 1960s under people like Fidel Castro or in recent Venezuela. This is sort of like a quasi-communist movement, also with an authoritarian leader, but very different to what we've got with Mkhonto weSizwe. And both of them have attracted a certain following. These are not modernist parties. These are not progressive movements. They're the opposite of progressive movements. Progressive movements give people civil liberties. These parties both want to do away with civil liberties. These are parties that fight against constitutionalism. These are parties that fight against individual rights. So, in a way, the emergence of the MK party and EFF has forced the ANC to actually decide to finally define what it is and become what it is. And I think we may be seeing it right now. Because it looks like we're on the threshold of this government of national unity that is spearheaded by the ANC and the Democratic Alliance. In both cases, as has been said many times, both parties are running a big risk here, because if this doesn't work, they both go down in flames. But I think part of that analysis is what brings them together. Because if we look at the DA, why would they do it? They have spent the last 30 years moaning about the ANC and the way the ANC has worked, taking legal action against some of their excesses and so on, and being the watchdog of against the ANC. Being the opposition party, they really relish the role. They view the world very differently. They've publicly stated that they wouldn't support things like BEE, national health insurance, etc. Why suddenly are they working together? Well, the answer to that, I think, may be a lot more simple than we think. I think there's a couple of facets to it. And that is that I think both parties understand one thing that other parties perhaps miss. And that is that if you toy with some of these radical ideas, like expropriation of land, like scrapping constitutions, etc., and you continue with the current deindustrialization that we have in South Africa could end up a very, very poor country, and it'll make our current unemployment look like a dream, right? We could go to 80% unemployment. If you look at some African countries, they're sitting with almost nobody employed. So it makes sense for the party of business to get together with a party that represents the interests of middle-class black South Africans. They form the rump of the numbers. You clear out the people that want to go and try other ideas, and they form their own little parties, and that is, largely in the EFF and the MK, and you put them together, and they become the rump of the center. Now, it was William Butler Yeats in his famous poem, The Second Coming, that said that, everything going mad and the center cannot hold. Well, yes, that was a poem written all about the calamity that can come when the strong center of anybody's life, any country doesn't hold. You'll have anarchy. Here we have a re-emergence of this very broad center, the very broad center we thought we had after 1994. But in actual fact, that was an illusion. We didn't have a center. What you had was a very big government that was trying to be all things to all men, and it was impossible. Perhaps we could be on the threshold of a country that actually does the right thing. What do I mean by the right thing? Well, we know that there's been a much maligned talk about the market and what the market wants to hear. We've followed this up in a number of our interviews, and the market quite simply is, the media, business, analysts, people that talk about countries, and I'm talking about both domestic and international. And if these people aren't happy with what they see, they say it. They act on it. Companies disinvest. People start putting their money into other countries that are less difficult to work with. I think that we're on the threshold of reversing that trend, largely because there is no future in being outside of the circle. And South Africa was rapidly getting outside of that circle. So it makes sense that a government who understands how the global financial picture works, because they've been doing this for 30 years, and the DA that largely represents business interests, get together, make South Africa a more saleable commodity, becomes a little bit less difficult to work with, becomes a bit more user-friendly, and we could be on the threshold of some prosperity. Now, it sounds like a hell of a surprise, and I never ever thought this was hard to achieve. It's just that we've had a government that would always make one step forward but then 3 steps back. Well, what happens if it stops making those backward steps? So why would the ANC change? I think they're changing for a very, very simple reason. They've realized that now that they've got the tribalists out of the way, the communists out of the way, that they can now do and behave in the best interests of South Africa, especially its economy. And they might as well, because if you really wanted to live in a paternalistic authoritarian country, well, then go and vote for MK. If you really want to live in a communist country where nobody has any rights, well, then, go to the EFF. So it's hard to see how they could win that vote back. So in a way, the natural coalition partners have pushed the ANC into this. And there's a similar thing with the DA. Snapping at their heels have been many of their coalition partners, especially the parties that were part of the multi-party charter, who couldn't see anything that the DA did as being positive. When you're the one bringing in all the votes for your coalition, eventually you start saying, well, perhaps it's on you. I'm going to go out there because I can find a date you can't. You keep on telling me how wrong we're doing this thing. Well, then what's the future in us being together? And in a way, I think if one looks at the experience in some of the metros on both sides where those coalitions have been unstable, not because of the opposition, but because of your coalition partners. These are the kind of things that sort of throw people outside of the coalition. Eventually you start saying, hey, I'm the salesman who's doing all the sales. You're doing no sales and you're shouting at me for not doing more sales. So perhaps the coalition partners here can bear some of the responsibility. But the point is that both parties were left with no option. Similarly, the IFP, which is the sort of third wheel in this government of national unity, has been out-Zulu'd by Zuma, has been out-royalist by MK. They might as well be a modernist party representing, people that want to live in the modern world in KZN and around the country. So it's also not surprising that they would decide that this was a good idea. What now? Well, we could see this government of national unity forming. It's going to have a rough ride. The opposition parties are going to have to deal with the fact that you've got two parties together, three parties together that are going to have nearly 2/3 of the vote. They're not going to change anything, but they might start applying some common sense laws and stop with the nonsense. South Africa could start seeing economic growth. We could have a little golden period and then go back to the ballot box. What happens at the ballot box after the country has some growth? Well, it could be a very different story, and those people that have been disrupting for years might not be supported. And in fact, many people who start to see their dreams realized as we start to eat into unemployment and start growing the economy, parties like the ANC and the DA could see their vote share growing, and that could be quite interesting. Do I see them merging? No, I don't think they need to merge. I think it's a coalition in a way made in heaven, where the ANC keeps on biting into the black market and the DA keep on biting into the peripheral market, and it carries on for as long as it needs to carry on. But the point is that we've got to this point, and sometimes desperation can bring out the real answer. And for South Africa, this could really be a positive outcome. So, what do we need to have here? Well, we need Parliament to go on, President gets elected, this government of national unity is established, members of the cabinet are installed. You're probably going to see the ANC taking most of the positions, but the DA would get some of the oversight positions. I've got a feeling we're going to get either a DA aligned Speaker of Parliament, and the Speaker's a bit like the referee, so it would be quite interesting to see a referee that comes from a different party. But I've got a feeling we're going to start seeing government working for the people, because if the election showed the politicians one thing, is that South Africans will vote you out if they think you're doing a bad job. And the ANC have never had to reckon with the repercussion of doing a bad job. Suddenly they do. Their best route to getting some of their support back is to do a good job. And this government of national unity gives South Africa the best shot we've had in 30 years in doing the right thing for everybody. So join me in a touch of optimism. Let's just hope that this thing plays out the way that I think that it could. We could have state-owned companies operating independently, not under some kind of deployment committee, but best person for the best job. The lights might just stay on. Business collaborating with government. This could be nirvana. This could be what we waited for many years. And we get to do it in the sunshine. So, South Africa, take a deep breath. It may not be as bad as we think, and we could be on the threshold of something really good. So let's raise a Pace Car Cup to the future of South Africa. Thank you for joining me.